everyone. If you like the Fitness Daily, just know that it's brought to you by Zor Fitness. At Zor Fitness, we offer coaching and individualized program design, as well as educational content for athletes and coaches. You can find it all in one place, zorfitness.com. Hey, Ben, thank you for being here today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So for those of you who don't know, I work at the University of Arizona as my full-time career as a strength and conditioning coach, and Ben is actually one of the other strength and conditioning coaches there, and we're office mates. And we also co-coach the swim team together. So the swim team's a pretty big team, so we take that on together as a joint effort. And throughout our time working together, one thing I've noticed a lot about Ben is that he is very creative with his programming and his coaching. And I like it a lot working with him because we complement each other very well. I'm very, I, w- I don't know what other way to say this, but I'm kind of a boring programmer. I stick to a lot of the basics. And throughout the time that I've worked with Ben, I've learned a lot of different techniques and things to do with athletes. And I'm always picking his brain. So he was one of the first people I thought of when myself and Zorben, we're talking about creating this podcast where we interview people who are basically experts in their field and are really good at what they do. So I have a lineup of people that I want to talk to, and Ben was one of the first people I thought of. So, Ben, give us a quick little introduction about yourself.
For sure. Well, first of all, I think you're a great programmer. Uh, I don't. I'm humbled to be on the podcast, and I don't. I'm flattered to be viewed as or considered like an expert, but I don't view myself as an expert. I just, I'm passionate about coaching and training, and I'm passionate about learning and trying to get better every day. And I feel like although maybe I increase my knowledge daily or weekly, the goal is daily, but weekly over time, I'm increasing my knowledge and experience. As that happens, I kind of just actually more so feel like there's so much more I don't know. That's kind of how I feel. And so it's always going to be a place of I feel like I'm always going to feel like a student. But
Yeah, and that's one thing I do want to bring up is that Ben is always seeking out more knowledge in the field. So it's cool to be surrounded by someone who is constantly trying to get better because that pushes everyone else to get better as well. So I think you do a really good job with always trying out new things, seeking out other experts in the field and reading and taking courses. So yeah, it's pretty awesome.
thank you.
Yeah, so
Um, oh, go ahead. What?
yeah.
About me?
Yeah, it's about you in terms of, if you have any athletic backgrounds, education, where you started, where you're at now, and all that good stuff.
Sure. I mean, athletic background, growing up, my main sports were football, ice hockey, and track and field. I was more of a middle distance, long sprint slash middle distance runner with the 400 and the 800 and the 4x4 relay. You know, Briefly ran Division III track for a couple of years before ultimately finishing up school at the University of Oregon. Um, I did not uh, major in anything exercise science or kinesiology related while I was at U of O. In that time, I was thinking I was going to go more so along the lines of creative professions or product design. Growing up in Oregon and going to the U of O, obviously Nike is right up the road, and so the thought process back way back then was, oh, I'm just going to design for Nike because I love sports, I love training, and I'm kind of more on the creative side. So that seems like an obvious 1+1=2. But as I graduated and I, pursued that career path, I ultimately realized that I hated it. I'm way more of a people person, and I much more enjoy working with people directly and helping people directly. And I always love training, and the more I trained, the more I realized I loved helping people with their own training, because I would then get approached with questions and advice on, you know, my own training, and or questions or advice on how to do exercises, how to program, how to train certain things, and I loved it. And so when I got to the point of being sick and tired of being sick and tired of pursuing that as something I wasn't passionate about, I decided I was going to truly give coaching and training an honest go. And that is honestly one of the best decisions of my life. It was just, I made that decision, and from there I was all in. Um, and I started literally from ground zero. I obviously had no degree, no certification. I started shadowing at the local health club, just personal shadowing personal trainers that are working with Gen Pop, grandmas, grandpas, soccer moms, weekend warriors, all that stuff. And then I always knew I wanted to work more with athletes and teams. That ultimately progressed onto working at a private performance facility. And I kind of just stuck in that performance atmosphere with the performance facilities. Ultimately, I was, working in the private sector for about 8 years, and then, I had an opportunity at the University of Arizona, and here we are today.
Yeah, yeah. So it's morphed from being, I think building the foundation with Gen Pop. I know that's how I started as well. It's extremely helpful because I feel like if you're able to help a lot of those people get better, training athletes is a little different, where they're usually
Sure.
naturally good at all this stuff, and now it's a little bit more of the advanced things for performance related. So yeah, it's pretty cool. So for those people who are listening, and aren't familiar with what a collegiate strength coach does, how would you summarize it?
We are support. Um, yeah, we're support in helping them, do what they need to do in their sport. Uh, whether it's helping build capacities, helping minimize deficiencies or deficits. We're just trying to help prepare them for the stressors and the demands in their sport, whether that's in practice or the actual competition. Um, you know, that's really what it comes down to, is like what's going to help them perform at their highest ability level. And also, I would say first and foremost, stay healthy and not get injured. Um, and so that's always going to be kind of like the number one focus. It's, sometimes I think maybe in the weight room, I think I've been guilty of it in the past, that, the importance of the weight room, it's very, very important, but ultimately it's simply what we're doing is simply supporting what they're truly there for, and that's playing their sport. And our job is to try to identify deficits or deficiencies, or areas that they might need help in, as far as building their capacities or building their ability to perform their sport in a more efficient manner. I would say, that's kind of the long and short of what our role is.
Yeah, for sure. And like you were saying, we're supporting what they're doing and trying to get them to be better at their sport. And a lot of these athletes without strength and conditioning most likely will still be at the top of their game, at the top level because they're at that level already. And this is just getting them that small percentage better to become more elite. So that's always the goal there. That's how I see it, is that they're still good at their sport without strength and conditioning. Then you add a smart strength and conditioning program to their overall process of getting better, and that's going to get them to that next level. For example, like you
Right.
could be a college athlete, D1, but if you want to go to Olympics, you're going to need a smart strength and conditioning program and follow that and implement it to get faster, stronger, healthier overall.
Absolutely. I mean, they made it into I mean, some, I always kind of have to remind myself, like, they made it into our weight room, like, without us. Like
Yeah.
whatever they were doing, middle school, high school, it was working enough that they were able to be recruited, earn a scholarship, or walk on with before we even met them. So obviously they're doing something right. And yeah, I think just once they're there, our job is just more so just helping helping them be able to do what they love doing or what they're really good at, helping them do it maybe a little bit better, more efficiently, and stay healthy. Because I think all these abilities that we're trying to help them with, whether it's capacities with their endurance or strength or power or mobility qualities or just helping them become better movers. At the end of the day, what we're really trying to make sure we're helping them with is just their ability to be available and stay healthy the whole season. And I say a lot that old saying of the best ability is availability. If I get an athlete to squat 315 or run, you know, uh, 4 340, that's all great. But if come game time or match time or meet time, whatever the sport is, if they're not in it because they're dealing with some nagging muscle or something like that or some injury, then it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm curious, I'm my head is going through different rabbit holes right now. So in that, if we go down this rabbit hole about the availability. So
Yeah.
how do you approach that? I know you have athletes who are coming in and they have such a high training load out in their own sport practice. So if you want to go over what sports you work with, so how do you balance that with the strength and conditioning?
Um, so the sports that I work with, obviously swimming with you. I assist with baseball with our director of performance, Jim Krempos, and then I work with women's tennis. I work with the track and field sprinters. You know, many of these sports, the highest level of volume that they're getting, the highest, most intense stressors that they are experiencing are coming through their practices. Um, and so I try to keep that in mind always when programming. And it's just kind of a reminder. What is the minimal effective dose? I love working in, you know, there's no shortage of methods that I believe can be helpful to an athlete. Um, and again, it's all comes down to like it's principles first, and then if the methods fall in line with those principles, awesome. There's no shortage of methods, but if I can do it in a way where it's not excessive and it's just kind of trimming it down to the essential stuff at the minimal effective dose, that's really what I'm going for. Because I do know with a lot of these athletes, especially at this level, less is more.
Hmm. Yeah, and I'm curious because I've never been to like a track practice for sprints. Like, what does that usually look like? Is it high intensity all the time, like working in that like anaerobic energy system? Do they do any like lower intensity work? Um, Kind of curious how that goes.
There will be with our sprinter program, there will be a bit of volume, especially in the off season. It's not always going to be uh, max velocity, all out sprints. It's not going to be, you know, the super focused, full intensity acceleration work. There will be capacity work in there, and there will be that volume work at certain points in their year for sure. Um, More so, like I said, in the off season or leading up to indoor season. Um, and so I just try to keep that in mind as they are progressing through in the weight room as well. So that will be, I mean, obviously they're not going to be doing the same type of stuff as distance or middle distance. It's going to look a little different. And even within the sprinter group, it's going to be a little different, whether it's a 200 and 100-meter sprinter, or maybe a 200 and 400-meter sprinter, maybe a little bit on the longer side of the sprint distances. It'll vary a little bit, but yeah, volume will be there. And that's something that I have to factor in with the programming that I give them.
Yeah, and I know we've had these discussions too with when we program for our swim team. Usually sometime in the fall semester, there's a period where their volume is so high, and you can just
Mm-hmm.
tell by their demeanor and their faces and their energy levels in the weight room that they're tired. And I know like me and you
Yeah.
sometimes have to make those impromptu changes with certain people and all that just because they don't have it in them. Their tank is pretty empty that day. So I definitely find that it's a challenge. So with a big team, how do you usually approach that? Do you usually just give a blanket, hey, we're cutting down volume, or do you look at it more from an individual basis?
Um, one of my principles is that like I'm never gonna try to fit a square peg into a round hole. I'm as best I can. I'm gonna try to do what's best for the individual athlete while factoring in also what's best for the collective group. Um, the way I program, I structure in a way that allows me to make those kind of in-flight adjustments, if you will, for the individual. Maybe like it's an upper or it's a lower body day, and someone's crushed, like just like from the volume, and they're really struggling with that. Or hopefully not, but like maybe it's a situation where like we're experiencing maybe a muscle strain or something, maybe slightly pulled, or it's giving signs that it's if we keep pushing it, something bad might happen. We're going to make that adjustment. Um, uh, if it's a big group, in the case of the swimmers, you soon as they walk in, we start to get an idea of where
Yeah.
it's all the clues. Like, are they chatty? Will they not shut up during the warm up, or all that stuff? If what I've learned, it might be annoying on the coach's end, but I keep in mind, like if they have a ton of energy and they're just a bunch of social butterflies and they're just chatty and just yucking it up and just won't shut up during the warm up, that's my clue of okay, we're in a decent spot there.
hmm
And it's like, all right, let's just get them going. And once they get going in their lift, this is actually probably going to be a very productive lift, and they're going to get a lot out of this. And we probably won't have to make too many changes because they're ready to go. On the flip side, if they come in and it's just kind of dead quiet, nobody's chatting, people are just laying on the ground or on the turf, and uh, just have kind of that blank expression on their face.
Yeah.
We might have to make some changes to the volume or the intensities, or it might just have to put it out there. Hey guys, if we're not dealing with a full tank of gas, if we are struggling here, talk to you and talk to Day or I, and let's make some adjustments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. We've seen that quite a bit, especially with the those sports that have such high volume, swimming being one of them, those
Mm-hmm.
endurance sports for the most part. So now I kind of want to get deeper into your brain and start picking on some of the things that you do in your coaching and programming. Um,
Sure. Here we
I know
go.
yeah, here we go. So, all right. So let's see. We were talking about your upbringing as a coach, and I know you worked in the private sector, which in the private sector, usually you're working with athletes of all different ranges. Sometimes like it's kids starting off in their sport, and then there's kids that are heading into college. They're like at the end of their high school career, heading into college, as well as college and professional level
Mm-hmm.
athletes. So what are some things you do with younger athletes and how do you progress them to get to the level of, being at the top of their sport?
100%. Sure. So, I mean, the private sector, you're right. I was dealing with athletes of all different types of sports, really, from football all the way to Irish dance. I had my niche sports, if you will. My primary sports that I worked with were football, ice hockey, wrestling, lacrosse, women's soccer. Um, but somewhere in there, I was working. There were lots of other sports that I was working with, and male, female, and a wider range of ages. I was working with athletes from 10 years old all the way up to college level, and even at times here and there, a couple of professional athletes. And when it came to the younger kids, it was just about helping teach them just general movement, help them develop general movement patterns. And it was very much a very big picture kind of slow burn approach. It was usually never anything fancy. It was actually, I would say it was almost never fancy. It was just the basics. But at the place that I was uh, primarily working at in the private sector is an amazing private training facility called the Spot Athletics in Columbus, Ohio. One of our uh, mantras there or philosophies there was teaching the basics savagely well, and it was all about helping these young athletes learn how to squat properly, helping these young athletes learn how to hinge, horizontal pull, vertical pull, pressing, getting to them to the point where they can just do push-ups or pull-ups, just helping lay a nice solid foundation of kinesthetic awareness and movement patterns that are going to set them up down the road for success when they do get to those higher intensity, more advanced methods, those sexier, if you will, training methods that you see on social media, or that you would let you kind of attribute more to like one of those high level performance facilities that work with professional athletes or collegiate setting or professional weight.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I know we've had this discussion before where we see some athletes come in and it doesn't seem like they had that foundation of,
Yeah.
these movement
And you can spot
patterns.
them
And
pretty quick,
yeah, usually the first
right?
day they're in the weight room, we know
Right.
who's had experience and who hasn't. Um,
Yeah.
so let's say someone does have a good foundation. You get them, and now let's say we're at the U of A. You get an athlete, they have a good foundation, and they're pretty good with where you're at. So now you're a happy coach because you're like, oh, I could use some of my like more advanced things with them. What are some of your go-tos that you like to do, like movements or training techniques?
Sure. I mean, certainly if they have a good foundation. Like I'm just happy because that gives us a lot of green light to work in other things. Like we're still going to stay on top of the things in the weight room that are going to help move the needle the most. But I'm going to try to find. I guess My first instinct is to try to find where the gaps are, maybe in their training. Maybe what are the things that they haven't been exposed to that I believe they would benefit from a lot. Um, and maybe it's we're still doing foundational movements, but we're starting to expose them to, isometrics, long duration isometrics. Maybe we're gonna start to expose them to slow eccentrics or even fast eccentrics, but they're all gonna be maybe a movement pattern that they already are familiar with, maybe a squat or a press or something like that. And I know that like one of my recent rabbit holes in the past year has been Weck method and David Weck's work with rotational movement training and coiling core training. I do like working that stuff into it. I feel there's a lot of carryover to their sport, whatever their sport is. There's going to be some carryover, and that's just another method that we can utilize to help them become better movers, become more efficient in their sport, and develop the qualities that we, at the very beginning of all this, that we are trying to help them with. Just be better movers, develop that strength, develop more power, and develop mobility. Because at the end of it, that's what we're trying to get. I don't care what method we use as long as that's what we can get at.
Yeah.
And if some of those, maybe you would put in the box of unconventional training or non-traditional training, movements that aren't necessarily your typical squat or hinge, press, pull, or even the Olympic lift, something that's maybe not those, but it's going to maybe complement them.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to kind of dive into a little bit more on coiling and those isometrics that you mentioned. So when um if we were to show you and I'm talking to the audience now, like if we were to show you one of the swimming programs that we have for them, you could easily point out things that are like, hey, that was definitely Ben's idea. That's Day's
Yeah.
idea, right? Like you could see there was a collaborative approach. And we do have coiling in the program for these athletes. And I know Ben has incorporated it a lot with baseball, tennis, the sprinters. So you'll see this a lot if you were to walk into our weight room. So I kind of want you to go into detail about this a little bit more because one thing with CrossFit, especially, like we're very sagittal plane movements and
Mm-hmm.
very like not much, we don't focus a lot on the rotational side of it. Not there's not much movements in the transverse plane and there's not much movement in the frontal plane as well. So this rotational is kind of a newer thing. And I think it's one of the things CrossFit lacks. And I know when I have my CrossFit athletes, I try to put in sprinkle in rotational things throughout the week for them because it's just something that they're not used to in the sport. So coiling, I think, is one of those great things that you've introduced me to over the past year for training that. So if you want to take the floor and start diving into that a little bit more, I think that's a really helpful thing that the CrossFit community can benefit from.
Sure. So, at the end of the day, when it comes to the coiling core training work or the rotational movement training, that is essentially just basically coiling, but now you're going from one side of your body to the other. Um, we're going after three main traits, and we're going after rotational range of motion, specifically in the T spine. We're going after rotational strength, and we're going after rotational power. Um, we're also going after. Sorry, this is the fourth one. So we're also going after movement efficiency. So I guess those four things: mobility, strength, power, movement efficiency. Um, and we're going after those through a series of rotational isometrics. Uh, and the way we are creating those rotational isometrics are factoring in how the trunk, the T-spine, how the core truly operates in movement, in sport. And so when we're doing the coils, the primary muscle groups that we're kind of targeting are the lower lats, the external obliques, and we're setting up these rotational isometrics that are finding what our true end range of rotation is, finding those extreme endpoints, and attacking those endpoints and strengthening those endpoints. And it's just basically isometrics, setting up, creating rotational contractions in a way that's going to establish some rotational torque. And it's an amazing kind of yin and yang effect when you're doing these because you have your rotational isometric contraction on one side of your body, but while that's happening on the opposite side, you're creating more mobility and you're creating more extension and or not extension, but more stretch, and you're just opening up that other side of your body. So while you're getting strength work, that's going to later lead to power output. You're just mobilizing and creating more flexibility on the other side. And when it comes to the exact types of coils, it really comes down to two different types of coils. You have, as the WEC method will classify as your front side coil, which is when you are essentially creating that rotational isometric contraction on the side that is your lead hip, kind of like your lead leg side. And then there's your backside coil, which is that rotational isometric that you're creating when you are creating it on your backside leg, your backside hip. And each one they're both very similar, but they also have their distinct differences. For the backside coil, that's going to have a lot more carryover to how the body is functioning and operating during sprinting and running, crawling. The backside coil is going to have more carryover to what is in play when we're swinging implements or throwing things like in baseball or tennis. Like if we're swinging a bat in baseball, that's that backside coil that's getting it coming into play. Or if we're throwing a ball, actually, if we're throwing a ball like a pitcher in baseball, they're actually going to experience both coils. When they kind of wind up and bring their leg up, they're in that front side coil position. And when they're getting to that opening up position, they're in that backside coil. And then when they release that ball and finish through, they're ultimately going to finish back on that front side coil. I guess what I'm trying to get at is these rotational isometrics are present in basically every sport at some point in time, unless we're a swim stroke that is not considered one of those long axis swim strokes, or maybe something that's true like bilateral, like a broad jump. That's going to be more just creating tension, or as WEC method would describe as they have their term for it is creating torsion, internal torsion and external torsion, but it's just creating tension to express that power. But anytime we're working kind of that cross crawl movement pattern, or where one side of the body is doing one thing and the other side of the body is doing something else, that coil is in play. It doesn't matter if it's swimming or baseball, football, track and field. It's just kind of helping strengthen the action that's already happening during the sport.
Yeah, and I know you've done it with most of the sports, as I mentioned. I'm curious, like, is there a way you progress them through it, or do you start everyone usually at the same spot? How does that work out? And usually, what do the sets and reps look like? Um,
Sure.
and just for everyone, like, if you want more background info, I know Ben walked me through some of these, and when we practiced it the next day, I would say the following 2 days, my lats were so sore. Like I was so sore in that area. And I just remember like just kind of like I would rotate back, like
Uh-huh.
just like try to squeeze my lats and like I would just feel it. So they're really effective and I think they
Well, that
play a
was
good
me
role
too
with
the first time I ever tried them too. Yeah.
yeah, they're wild. And I think it also helps out with body awareness too. Like I feel like if someone has troubles like engaging that position, that definitely helps. But yeah, back to the question about the sets and reps and how you approach it.
Sure. I mean, honestly, the way I approach it, the way the WEC method teaches it, and the way I you know still teach it in with my teams at U of A, it's a positions first, transitions second type of approach. We want to establish those positions first, much like we might teach a traditional movement pattern like a squat or a hinge. We're going to help them find those positions, and then we can start moving through from one point to the other in that movement pattern. Um, it's always, I'll typically start off the athletes on the wall. So they'll be against the wall. They'll be creating their longer mobilized side against the wall, and they can just lay into the wall so that they can put all of their focus into that area, the side of their body that's the coiling side of focus where we're coiling. And we're going to set them up in a way that's going to allow them to find that extreme end range of that rotational mobility and really dig into contracting as deep as they can. And oftentimes the first time we do this, yes, they're going to, it's oftentimes it's going to cramp up because they've never felt that spot before, or at least not with that much intention and focus. And it's going to cramp up because that's not something that they're used to doing, at least not in that intensity. And then feel that soreness that we feel a day or two after we do it for the first time. That's just like, oh yeah, we've never done that before, at least in that manner. And so because of that, I really don't put any sort of time limit into how long they do them for. As you've seen me or heard me instruct them, I just want you to set up that contraction, and you're just trying to engage and squeeze that contraction as hard as you possibly can until you feel like you've maxed it out. Like you can't contract it any deeper, any harder, or you feel that cramp coming. And when you get to one of those 2 points, that's when you stop. Mm-hmm. And then, we'll have them kind of learn it they'll flip around and perform that same rotational isometric coil on the other side of their body. And that's how I'll do both the front side coil and the back side coil. And just doing it against the wall, it just gives them that support against the wall. I feel like it lets them focus on the coil and not have to think about too many things, because what they're doing is already a little bit foreign, at least initially, and just helping them understand the concept of what we're really getting after. Oftentimes, they'll squeeze it in a way that's just squeezing down that elbow, and they're engaging the lat, but it's more so the high lat, something that they're used to when they would be doing a lat pull down or some sort of vertical pull or horizontal row. But with that coil, we're not just trying to squeeze down that arm and flex. We're trying to close that gap between the shoulder and the hip, and just make the space between the shoulder and the hip as minimal as possible. And it's that combination of that kind of rotational contraction while also almost doing a side bend, if you will. It's like a rotating side bend, which is obviously going to be a bit different than what they might be used to in a traditional sense of just a horizontal pull or a vertical pull. But yeah, once they got that down, I try to get them off the wall as quickly as I can and progress them into something different, where they're performing that coil either just out in space in the middle of the room on the turf, or we'll do more of a rotational movement training approach to it, where they're setting up that coil out in the middle of the room, and then they're transitioning from that first initial coil on one side to the opposite side. And so they're going from one coil to the other coil. And now that's what, WEC method would classify as rotational movement training. It's still coiling, but we're just going from one coil to the other coil, okay, one side of the body to the other side of the body, which is what's happening when we're in sport. When we're sprinting, we're going from one side of the coil to the other side of the coil. It's optics wise I'd say most people, they don't catch that proximal rotation that's occurring during when someone's sprinting, because it's happening so quickly. And when you're sprinting, that rotation, it's not what you would think of as like some huge rotational med ball throw, right? It's very quick and short, but it's happening. And then obviously with throwing, throwing things or swinging implements. Uh, there's that rotational, that I would say those areas of sport, in those sports where there's something being swung or thrown, obviously I think that's going to be the easiest uh, visually to see and understand. Yeah, they're obviously rotating there. So yeah, this would make sense. But that rotation is still happening when somebody's running sprinting straight. That rotation is still happening when we're in the pool and we're if we're a long axis swimmer, whether it's a freestyle or backstroke. Um, and just being able to do these things, it's going to be helping us be stronger with it, have more power output through that motion, and we're just increasing that range of motion so that we are able to now just be a more efficient mover, whatever the sport is, whatever the movement is in that sport at that point in time in the competition. And they're just going to be a little bit more effective at it, and just being a more optimal mover, an efficient mover. That's going to help obviously improve performance, but most importantly, it's going to minimize potential injuries down the road where there may be some mobility uh, deficits or immobility issues at play.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's definitely, I know we've had this conversation because I asked you about it recently, like what your, if someone were to go, say, hey, why are you doing coiling? What your reasons were. And I remember you mentioning that, like just getting into those deep ranges of motion. And like we had that conversation and literally last week, one of our swimming athletes, he just stopped by just to say hi while I was in the office. And he mentioned we introduced coiling this summer to him, and you know who this is.
I think I know
Yeah,
who it is.
yeah. And he was saying he was mentioning that the coiling that he's been doing over the summer has helped him so much, and he hasn't been swimming as much. And he's like, yeah, I just feel like so much stronger in the pool, like being able to get into that position. And I think that's one of the things when we're trying something new with athletes is like, um, sometimes I'll do things and it works for me, but like I'm also not a swimmer, so I don't know how it would translate to the pool. So then hearing an athlete say that it's translating well to their sport, it's like, okay, cool. Like this is helping, they're feeling it. And then if we get their buy-in too, which is great. So I know most of the team, I've heard several people tell me about the coiling stuff that we're doing and that they really like it. So it's something that we're implementing a lot more with this upcoming season. So I'm excited for that. Um,
And that's the reward. That's when you like feeling like what we are doing, what we're programming for them, what we're kind of teaching them movement wise in the weight room is when they are doing it in the weight room and performing it. That's great. But if they have that moment, or if and when they get to that point where they themselves feel and believe that it's helping and they feel stronger and it's helping them with their actual sport, at the end of the day, that's the goal. Um,
mhm.
and not saying that's going to happen 100% of the time, but like when that happens and they let you know that, hey, this is helping me, that's all the affirmation I need to kind of keep doing it.
Yeah.
And I've had, it's not just been with that individual swimmer. It's been with members of the track, many members of the track and field team. That I'm not trying to tell them like, hey, this is what you are feeling in track,
Yeah.
and when you're in your sport, do you understand? Say yes. Say yes. I just help them with the movement. I help them with the technique in the weight room, and I just kind of let it go. I just kind of release it into the wild. That by being the athlete, and it's amazing when they then come back. Maybe, and it's not going to be it's going to be a long term thing, but months down the road, later in the season, maybe in the following year, they come up to you and they're like, "Hey, coach, when I was coming out, when I was coming out of the blocks and I was going through my dry phase, like I was feeling my coil like at play, like it was my engine. I was feeling that like crazy, like that's an awesome feeling that, what you're doing is helping. And same with baseball. Like and that's been I would say if it's a sport like baseball, or um, if it's a sport like baseball where there's obvious rotation as a center point of that sport, where you're swinging a bat or throwing a ball, or even tennis where you're swinging a racket, um, and they feel that, and we toil earlier in the day, and then they go out and do hitting out at the ballpark, and they just felt just primed and ready to go. They say, like, after we did that in the weight room with the coiling work, I went out and hit. I felt amazing. I felt I felt primed and ready to go. That's what we're getting at, and that's really awesome to get when they feel like it's helping and they believe it's helping.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think that's also a product of like someone like you who takes the time to learn about the sport, to look at the biomechanics side of it and all that, and just putting in that effort instead of just like, hey, this is what I usually do with every other team, and this is what you're doing, right? Just considering the sport, the
Yeah, I've tried
demands.
that before. That doesn't work.
Yeah, yeah, right. Um, so with coiling, you mentioned how you start off with like that isometric contraction against the wall, then you go to the
Yeah.
turf to an open area, and eventually you get into the rotational part of it where it's a little bit more dynamic. So
Yes.
I know you're also someone who does a lot of like different isometric techniques, extreme isos, quasi isos. I kind want to pick your brain on that and what are some things you do currently with your teams that you've tested out that have proven to be pretty good or not,
Yeah.
and just some of your favorite ISO techniques.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, like, I mean, I've always known about isometrics, and I've always known that they have a lot of benefit, and they're a powerful method to utilize in the weight room. To be honest, though, it wasn't until this past summer that I started to really, really understand, or I would say, get a much more bigger picture idea of the power, the power of isometrics could potentially be for
Yeah.
athletes and their performance. I would say it was an unplanned rabbit hole that I fell into this past summer. Prior to the summer, I just kind of looked at isometrics as, oh yeah, it's a good idea to do. You're teaching, just a point in a movement. It's good to do, sure. But if I'm being honest, for the longest time, I feel like I made the mistake of just looking at isometrics as a way to improve concentric movement.
Hmm.
Like, isometrics are just there to help you get better at concentric movement. That's the that's really the biggest thing that they offer. And you know, summertime is when I'm really, really trying to actively seek out educational opportunities, not just like courses, but I'm trying to reach out, connect with other coaches around the country, whether it's the private sector, the collegiate setting, or even professional setting. And so I had an opportunity to go up to Tempe, Arizona to speak with Buddy Morris with the Arizona Cardinals. So Buddy, legendary strength coach in this field, he's been a long time head strength and conditioning coach in the NFL. He's still involved with the Arizona Cardinals, but now he oversees all of their return to play athletes. And so I had this opportunity to go up there and talk with Buddy. Um, when I went up there, I literally had a list of at least 50 different questions that I felt were important to ask him, that I thought I want to get his thoughts on. I got up there, and Buddies just starts talking, and I quickly realized that, like, yeah, I'm not going to ask any questions right now. I'm just going to listen because this is amazing. And I I thought was important. What he's telling me is actually important. this stuff is what I need to listen to. So we talked about a lot of stuff, and one of the things we talked about was, their implementation of isometrics into their weight room. And it hasn't been just what I learned from Buddy that day. Since that day, I continue to dig deeper, kind of research more about the principles that they implement, or principles that they base their programming off of up there. Researching more about the other staff members, and another guy that I start to learn more about was this guy by the name of Kyle Salmons. He's their director of sports science up there, and he has seemed to really spearhead this this these principles under this. I shouldn't say it's a system, but his principles are really focused on isometrics to slow eccentrics to fast eccentrics to dynamics. He dubs I've listened to a lot of his podcasts, and I know he dubs the title, the name of these set of principles methods as the Beast Factory. And it takes like I said, it takes a isometric to eccentric to slow eccentric to fast eccentric to dynamic approach. And within those kind of four kind of primary areas, there's lots of different subcategories of these areas and different ways in which they implement the isometrics and eccentrics and whatnot. And so I was kind of low key obsessed about this stuff ever since, talking with Buddy, and then, learning as much as I could from Kyle Salmon's in content that he's put out through podcasts or out on the internet. And yeah, it's I would say it's definitely started to shift the way I look at the stuff in the weight room when it comes to like strength.
Yeah.
And when it comes to isometric stuff, a big one is long duration isometrics. As really, it's a way of, as both Buddy and Kyle, as Buddy explained when I met with him, and Kyle explains in the podcast, it's a way of creating constraints for the athlete. And what we're going after with a lot of these long duration isometrics is helping them find proper positions and create proper positions through the intended muscle groups, and making sure that, what they are doing in the weight room, the movements that they're performing, they're actually going to be performing it with the intended muscle groups in the intended, like, kind of order of, muscle firing. It's also going to be a way of helping them, attack potential weak areas that the body is, I guess, hiding or trying to compensate for, to kind of make sure that it's not going to be compromised again. If maybe it's a site of a previous injury, or if it's just a non-dominant muscle group that's always allowed other muscle groups kind of do the job for it. It's going to help. These isometrics are going to help, I guess, as Coach Salmons describes as stress shielding. If we're compensating, if our body is trying to protect or hide an area of our body that's been previously injured, or that is weak, our body's not going to allow that spot to experience that stimulus unless we work hard to get through that stress shielding to actually start to stimulate that area. And as he describes in his podcast, and as he indicates through like research, it often takes a long duration isometric to get to those areas of need, and 30 seconds or more before we can actually start to stimulate those weak areas or areas that are being compensated for, and actually create some adaptation there. So there's all that. And talking with Buddy and listening to Kyle's stuff, it's really opened up my eyes and kind of got me rethinking as far as like, when it comes to concentric work or eccentric work or isometric work, what are the different implications that each of these different muscle contractions are going to have on our body, not just muscular wise, but tendon wise and neuromuscular wise. And one of the things that isometrics are going to help us a lot more with is, yes, training the muscle, but the tendons, strengthening the tendons. And I think that's something that I am guilty of not always considering when I go into the programming. I'm free forever when I look at strengthening. I'll be honest, like I'm often just thinking about the muscular system. Yeah, I think about the nervous system too, but like tendons, that's not a very familiar area, I feel like, to a lot of strength and conditioning coaches, at least to me. And many of the things that many of the courses or coaches, or I guess specialists that I have spoken to over the years when I've gone to learn and hone the craft, I guess, if you will, if tendons isn't really an area that you talk about a whole lot, right? And so it's just kind of gotten me thinking, like, uh, you know, what are we doing for tendons as it relates to how they interact with the muscular system? Um, if we're always training the muscular system, are we setting ourselves up for someday having a point where our muscular system is so strong that it's completely compromising what our tendons are doing? And so I guess, I don't want to speak too much on, for uh, the stuff that, Buddy does, or Kyle Salmon's ideas, but I guess it's just really gotten me to open my eyes a little bit more and start to think about, like, what are the true implications, muscular wise, neuromuscular wise, of what we're doing when it comes to either eccentrics, isometrics, concentric work. And honestly, we have athletes that are very high level at the University of Arizona. Many would consider them like, oh yeah, they're in the top percentile, but as we all know about those high level athletes, the more high level athlete you are, the probably more better compensator you are. They're the best compensators. That's how they gotten to be where they're at. They can compensate incredibly well. And so these isometrics are a potential way to find those compensations and break through and break through those compensations and get them, or not break through compensations, but get them out of those compensations and truly start to stimulate the body in the areas that we're intending to stimulate it, and create the adaptation that we're truly trying to create the adaptation. Uh, you know, Sorry, that was very long-winded,
I know
but
that's
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 kind of what's kind of blown me away this past summer. It's been my low-key obsession, and that's honestly real. Like I said, it's started to. It's I'm not completely redoing all of my training programs. I'm not changing my principles, philosophy, but those all stay the same. I'm trying to create better movers. I'm trying to create help athletes become more resilient, and I'm trying to help them become more efficient in their sport. And what I found is the power of isometrics is way greater than I have ever thought they were, along with the slow eccentrics. And it's made me take a really hard look of how I approach the strength work in the weight room. And it's I'm already starting to adopt a lot of these principles and approaches to my teams this year. And with the swim team, like we've talked about it too, when we've had our offsite think tanks programming for the swim team. We talked about it during those programming sessions, and we're already kind of starting to implement these methods into the swim program.
yeah. And I think it's one of those things a lot of times. in CrossFit too. And I think most strength coaches across all sports, they look at ISOs a lot as like a tool, a technique to lift more weight, right? You have a
Yeah,
sticking point somewhere. We're going to do like a little ISO at the bottom or something like that to address that sticking point, get stronger in that position so that you could push more weight eventually. So that's one way I've seen it used most often. And then that's the way I used to think about it most of the time.
yeah.
Another one is like core when you think of like a plank or, holding a position. Um, that's the other one. And then the rehab with tendon strength and all that is another big one that I think is becoming a little bit more popularized. But like you were saying specifically, like there's so many other benefits you could do with it, like benefits with doing these longer duration and extreme end ranges, like the neurological side of it, the muscle firing side of it, which falls under the neurological. Um, and like you can still gain a lot of strength from it without getting the soreness. So it's a very great tool to use if you're have a competition coming up or you have to manage your soreness a little bit more. So these are things like a great tool that I think is often not looked at because we prioritize so much dynamic movements and the concentric side of the strength and conditioning world.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. Like we always measure what we can do concentric. Not always, but most of the time,
Yeah,
right? How much weight can we move concentrically?
right.
What can we do? And then take it a step further, go beyond the weights. What are the metrics that we're typically focusing on the most when we're doing force plate testing, right?
Yeah,
The outputs,
yeah.
and
Power and
and
force.
it's right. Um, and so, but then so now I'm thinking like, all right, yeah, outputs are great. That's ultimately, uh, that's very important. But what are we doing eccentrically? What are our capabilities there? And
Right.
like obviously, yeah, it's a side of the training that I think easily gets forgotten about within a lot of situations. At least for me. And it's like I said, it's something that is very much starting to kind of shift my lens a little bit as far as what where I'm starting to look.
Yeah.
Um, you know, and go even beyond that stuff, like the isometrics. It's a phenomenal method to potentially implement for situations where maybe soreness, we got to take account for how much soreness or residual uh, soreness we might feel after this workout. So maybe isometrics might be a very beneficial method to implement on this particular day. Perhaps it's, uh, the days leading up to a certain competition, or maybe we're still recovering and we're still sore from you know the competition, and it's a day or two afterwards, and we need to get some weight in the work. We need to get some work in the weight room, but our bodies are still thrashed. How can we get some quality work in? How can we kind of expedite this recovery process and get going, but not continue to crush our body? And that's another thing that Buddy and touched on, and I've heard Kyle Salmons touched on during his podcast is, isometrics are potentially a very powerful method to implement during in-season training
Hmm.
and helping recovery and helping set the athletes up for success for the week ahead. Um, so yeah, I think that there's a lot there that I'm just kind of really starting to turn my wheels on, I guess you could say.
Yeah, for sure. So we talked about coiling. We got into a little bit of ISOs. And with ISOs, you've mentioned um some of the neuromuscular benefits and all that. So now I kind of want to go into the neuro side of things, since I know
Okay.
that's another area that you tend to
Another rabbit
implement in
hole.
your, yeah, another rabbit hole. And so just for background information for the audience, we had a every year, our staff hosts like this little performance clinic where we have speakers come in. We invite everyone around the region to come and just, spend a day listening and learning to people talking about their areas of expertise. And someone who came in this year was Dan Victor, who was someone recommended by Ben. And Ben knew about him before and thought he would be great to bring in as our main speaker. And he was awesome. And he's a strength and condition, he's a performance coach. I'll say more performance coach. Um,
Yeah.
that works in upstate New York and works with all levels of athletes, from young to professional. And one of the things he implements a lot is he talked a lot about the neurological approach to performance, and mentioned how we often look at the muscular system most, but we neglect the power of the uh, neurological system has on performance. And so, with as he was presenting, I was like, oh, like that reminds me a lot of stuff that Ben implements, and now it's making sense. So I want you to kind of take the floor on some of the things you do to address that side of performance training that people often neglect.
Sure. So I guess quick disclaimer before I dive into any of this stuff. I'm not a neurologist and I do not know the science of it inside and out. And I'm not going to claim to because it gets very deep and very complex. And there are a lot of big terminology. There's a lot of terminology in there that is just, that's not where I'm at right now. I haven't gotten there yet.
You're more on the
But
practical side of it.
I'm
Yeah.
on the practical side of it. So if I cannot completely explain the science behind it or use the correct terminology, that's not who I am. And I'm
Yeah.
not going to claim to be that. But at the end of the day, with all this stuff, whether it's the coiling or the isometrics, um, you know, I do understand when I observe something working and not, or I do see when I see something working or helping or creating some sort of change neuromuscular wise, like I do understand that. I see that. So yeah. Um, but as far as the neural prep work, is there a specific area that you want me to
Yeah.
start at first?
I think a cool one, because again, it's something that I think it's so useful and it's like so underutilized or not because it's not known about. It's like something like RPR, right?
Yeah,
Something that's such a simple technique that you can implement if you want to just like go over what that is, how you implement it, and we'll go from there.
right. I mean, I would say RPR is probably my first exposure to uh, neurology uh, applied to performance. Um, I would say at this, almost 10 years ago at this point, I took an RPR course and learned got certified in RPR. And that experience at that point for me is in my, as a young strength coach, still kind of figuring out, you know, how to be a strength coach, how to be a good coach, all that good stuff. That was obviously a mind blowing experience, just kind of learning that stuff, and it was just like, oh, geez, this is different. Um, RPR, I've been implementing RPR with myself and my athletes ever since. It's brief or brief summary of what RPR is for anybody that hasn't heard of it yet or hasn't doesn't isn't familiar with it. It's essentially a system of neurological wake up drills that are self performed through deep digital pressure on targeted tissue areas that interact with uh, pre-synaptic hotspots, if you will, on your body. And through these, and they call them reset drills that you're performing, digging your thumbs and fingers into certain areas of your body in a certain, manner. And essentially what's going to happen is it's going to allow for faster synaptic delivery during those transition areas, if you will. And it's going to have huge positively impactful change, mobility wise, muscular wise, power output. It's going to have positive impacts on resting heart rate, balance and stability. And so, yeah, it's something that I've worked into with my athletes for years, as I've said. And I would say as powerful as those potential benefits are, I would say the biggest thing it's helpful for, as I found, is just helping offset compensation patterns that have been developed over time. So, helping ensure that the proper things that the proper muscle groups that we are wanting to drive a certain movement are the ones actually driving that movement. And the proper order of the firing of the muscle groups involved, the primary muscle group, and then the supporting muscle groups, those are also going to be firing, but it's all going to be happening in the correct order. If I'm explaining this to the athletes, I'm saving them all the science that I don't have down. But if we were looking, I like to use like electricity and light bulbs as the analogy. That's the one that kind of was easiest for me to kind of understand, is that, our body, the muscles are like the light bulbs, and the tendons, the bones, all the connective tissue, that's like the fixed lighting fixture and the house that the light bulbs are in. Well, obviously the electricity is your brain and your nervous system. And sometimes the light bulbs in our house are not turned up to full illumination. Maybe they're operating on kind of a dimmer, or maybe you turn on the light switch and a different light like the light that you want turned on in the house isn't turning on. Instead of the kitchen light turning on, it's the guest bedroom light. And so RPR is our way of basically if it's on a dimmer and that muscle isn't operating to full capacity or firing at speeds that it's truly capable of, RPR is our way of actively engaging our neuromuscular system so that muscle can fire to its full capacity and our muscular system can operate in the correct order that's really meant to operate in. And so just kind of making sure that the light bulb is, if you will, is shining to full illumination, and the circuitry in the house is all in the correct order. But yeah, it's been powerful a lot for my athletes, as far as helping them with mobility, strength, power outputs, and just helping minimize soft tissue injuries. I believe it's had a tremendous impact on just minimizing how many soft tissue injuries that we have experienced over the years. So yeah, it's a tool in the toolbox. And I know, I know our boss Jim, he likes to bust my balls, and I know he likes to kind of label me as the RPR guy, and he likes to give me a lot of crap for RPR, but I do resist that label of like an RPR person. It's just a tool, right? And it's just a tool that's going to help us get the outcomes that we're trying to get. I don't give a shit. Excuse me. I don't give a crap if,
You're good.
I don't give a crap if what the method is. If it's helping us get a certain outcome, especially if it's helping us reduce risk of injury, I want to know about it. I want to learn about it. I want to see if it can be easily implemented. I want to see if it makes sense to implement it, and if it checks all those boxes, like why wouldn't we? Um, and I know it's, when we, we've implemented it with the swim team at this point in time. I've implemented with all my other groups. Um, it certainly takes a couple minutes on the front end to kind of teach them and to coach them up a little bit on it. But once they got it, we're making powerful changes at the beginning of their warm-ups within a minute or less.
Mhm.
So, it's just so quick, so easy. It would be a little silly not to do it, I feel.
Yeah. And like it's one of those things, and the reason like our boss always give some crap about it is because if you see someone do it, or let's say you're in a commercial gym or anywhere, and you're seeing someone do RPR, it's a weird looking technique. Like you're rubbing your chest, you're rubbing your thighs, like creating friction, you're rubbing the back of your head. It's it's all these weird techniques, and if you don't know about it, you're like, what is happening here?
Yeah. And that's
Yeah,
BS. Like, that's
yeah.
snake oil. Like, what are you
Yes.
trying to sell me? Like,
Right. It looks
you're
very
full
like
of crap.
gimmicky. Yeah.
Yeah. I get it.
It-
I would probably feel the same way. In fact, I think I know I would feel that same way, but
yeah.
which is, it's one of those things where to understand it, to kind of not understand it, but to really grasp like the potential powerful positive impact that it can have. I think it's one of those things that you just kind of have to experience and
Hmm.
go through, for you to kind of see the potential of it.
Right. And that's how I would go about like if someone were curious about it, because it is like we were saying, a different technique. Like I think there's videos on YouTube that kind of go over it and all that and do it on yourself. And that's usually where most people will get the buy-in because like they'll do it on themselves and they're like, how the hell did that just happen? Like you'll notice crazy things with your movement patterns and things that like maybe some like lagging parts that you may have that out of nowhere are responding quicker now. And you're just like, how did that happen? So it's definitely something that like I encourage everyone to just test out and try it out. And if it you like it and it works for you, great. You like you Ben mentioned, you have another tool in the toolbox. Do it in your warm up, and it'll help you a ton before your squat session or whatever workout you got going on.
Yeah. Yeah. And like with many of the uh, methods that I implement with my teams, these neural prep methods, if you will, the beauty of RPR and all many of these other methods is that they don't need me for it. It's a tool that they have in their own toolbox, and so it doesn't matter if I'm there or if I'm not there. If they're out at practice and I'm not at that practice, or if they're on the road and I'm not there, they are empowered to do it on their own. It's a tool for them, and they now have a tool that is going to help them empower themselves when they feel that they need it, and it's only allowing them to kind of have more control, more ownership of their own body. And they don't, I don't need to lay a finger on them. Like, I'm not even like, it's all them. And, when they go through it, and it's kind of like the coiling. If when teaching them how to perform, their RPR wake up drills, and seeing their reactions, that's awesome. But seeing them out at practice or at a competition where I'm not like the one leading it, and I'm just kind of an observer. I'm in the background observing from afar, and I see them going through their RPR wake up drills. It puts a smile on my face because no one's making them do that. I'm not. Coach Ben's not there saying, "Hey, do your RPR now." Were you crazy? You got a competition in 30 minutes. Like, no one's ramming it down their throat. No, they've experienced the power of it, the the benefits of it on their own, and that's the buy, and then they're bought in, and
Mhm.
they're and having that buy-in and that belief that it's helping, like that's powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And like that's what we want as coaches, right? Is to give as many tools for increased performance. So it's like, you know, a lot of times athletes will go to competitions, meets, games without you there. And you want them to have everything, you know, to their disposal. And you want them to be aware of everything that works for them that they could do. Because at the end of the day, what we want is we want athletes to perform, you know? And it's the
Hmm.
same. It's kind of like if you're working with the Gen Pop, what do you want? You want them to live healthy. Like it's there's a goal and you want like everyone has a goal, whoever you're working with, whether it's an athlete or not. An event and essentially you want them to reach that goal. And we know with like the athletes we work with, they want to win. So we want to make sure that we're doing everything they can. Like we're doing everything we can to make sure they have every tool to win.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So we talked a lot about all the different stuff that you do. Like I mentioned earlier, like Ben's really great at going out of his way and learning and then teaching all of us. And I'm really grateful that I get to work with him and share an office. So I get to pick his brain a little bit more than others because he
Well,
can't escape me.
me to you as well. Like you have helped me. You have taught me a lot of things in the time that we've been working together too. Like
It's
there are things that I am not well versed in that I are not my I'm trying to resist the word like expert, but expertise, my areas that I'm more familiar, not as familiar with, I guess. Like you're my go-to with many areas.
it's a
So
collaborative approach
we're
for
very
sure.
complementary, I believe.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I agree. So let's say someone has questions or wants to reach out to you, or if you offer like online training or anything, where can they reach you or contact you?
Sure. So I guess social media wise, I do have a an Instagram account. It's coach underscore Ben H. Uh, email. I'm, I'm I welcome emails as well. My school email is Ben Hollander at arizona.edu. Yeah, I don't have any online coaching kind of activity at the moment, if you will. I believe that's something in the works in the near future. When that for sure happens, I'll definitely let you know. But anytime if anyone has any questions, wants to talk about any of this stuff, just yeah, shoot me a message, shoot me an email. And obviously, I love geeking out on this stuff. I love talking about this stuff. So I love helping people. So anything I can do to help people or just talk shop, I'm always down as long as we're not in the middle of starting a swim session with 70 plus athletes and we're
Yeah.
kind of up to our gills with coaching.
Yeah, it gets kind of chaotic, pretty crazy times. But thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it. And if anyone has any questions for Ben, feel free to reach out. We'll make sure to put his contact info in the video in the podcast notes as well. And yeah, it was good talking to you.
Great talking to you. Thanks, Eric.